President Trump believed a couple of tweets would bring her down, but Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett responded with a $100 million lawsuit that's now rattling Washington to its foundations. It began with a tweet, 3 of them actually, blasted from President Donald Trump's verified X account around 6 a.m. on a Thursday. In just a few minutes' time, they were all over. And then what? The tweet explicitly cited Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, calling her corrupt in her financial dealings, compromised by foreign forces, and stealing campaign contributions for personal excesses. The language was strong and unequivocally personal. One of the tweets posted, "Jasmine Crockett is a fraud, bought and paid for. Investigate her connection to foreign dollars." That charge alone shook Washington to its core. And here's the best part. There was no proof. No connections to investigations, no backstory, and no previous public disagreement. Why was she being targeted? Was it political? Personal? Something else altogether? By 6:30 a.m., the tweets exploded across social media. Hashtags like #CrockettExposed and #TrumpTargets. Women began trending. The narrative was clear. President Trump had launched an attack on a sitting congresswoman. But was it justified? Crockett had recently made headlines nationally for her tough grilling of a prominent Trump supporter on a televised congressional hearing regarding campaign finance ethics. Was this payback? Was it to silence her, to counter the political upstart in Congress? But the true question was this simply another politician's ploy, or was something more personal involved? The matter escalated in a matter of hours from merely a social media controversy. Her staff was being threatened aggressively within hours. An email told her that she should watch her back. The Capitol Police were notified. Security measures were heightened. Crockett needed to cancel a scheduled town hall meeting in her district because of security worries. What had begun as a series of tweets quickly became an all-out security nightmare. But that's where the tale takes a disturbing twist. This was more than a cyber attack. This was an orchestrated, coordinated effort of intimidation, and it was fueled by words from the president. Crockett's office, which is usually filled with constituent issues and committee work, was immediately converted into a war room. All messages, all threats had to be recorded. Her staff hadn't experienced anything like this previously. On social media, Crockett's images were removed, distorted into conspiracy theories, and shared with hashtags indicting her as a criminal, a foreign agent. Fact and fiction blurred. More disturbing was the extent of the belief behind the threats. Trump's words were not merely regarded as political spin, they were believed as fact by many in his base. The intensity of the reaction was unlike anything Crockett had experienced before. By mid-afternoon, her security was increased. Threats had escalated to direct, tangible messages. One voicemail simply said, "Traitor, you'll get what's coming." It was clear that the president's tweets weren't just fueling an online firestorm. They were stoking very real and very dangerous threats. But it did not end there. The degree of venom was so high that Crockett's family was also attacked. Her mother got a creepy letter, hand-addressed, postmarked on the day after the tweets. It had inside a typed note that accused Crockett of stealing America's future. It had attached a picture from a right-wing meme account with the words, "She'll pay for what she's done." That letter was the tipping point. Crockett's attorneys sprang into high gear, gathering evidence. They screenshotted each threatening text, saved each voicemail, and started working on a litigation plan. The president's words had consequences, and now it was time for Crockett to strike back in the only manner that would compel the discussion to remain centered on facts, a lawsuit. But why take this route? Why sue the president? What did she stand to gain? It wasn't entirely about clearing her name. Crockett wasn't doing it for herself. She was upholding the integrity of her office, ensuring the security of her employees, and safeguarding the direction of the nation's conversation. If the president could use derogatory language and bluster, who was next? By Friday afternoon, Crockett's staff had already written the framework of a defamation lawsuit. Each tweet was listed. Each threat was recorded. The case was simple. Trump had employed his megaphone to spread false and defamatory remarks, which had precipitated real-life ramifications. But there was a huge twist. Crockett wasn't responding to the tweets. She wasn't retweeting insults or firing back shots. No, she was cooking up something much stronger, a lawsuit that would bring the president to account for his actions. By Saturday morning, Crockett had spoken out, having gone almost too full. Days without saying a word as part of a strategic silence, she entered a packed press briefing room in Washington, D.C. She was accompanied by her lawyers and two other congresswomen. The atmosphere in the room was charged, the cameras intently watching everything she did. Her words were simple, straightforward, and forceful. "Let me be clear," she started, her tone firm. "The President of the United States used his office and platform to disseminate false, malicious information about me. That information has put my life, my staff, and my family in danger, and I will not remain silent regarding it." Boom. The room went silent. Her words were a cry for accountability, not only for herself, but for anyone who had been victimized by false accusations from a powerful public servant. This wasn't about defending herself. It was about making a precedent. No one is exempt from the law. As her attorneys came forward, they verified that the suit had been filed. The president now had serious legal repercussions for his irresponsible actions. This wasn't a game anymore. Crockett's battle was just getting started. But this was not the end of the story. The media frenzy surrounding the lawsuit was intense. Legal analysts were debating the merits of Crockett's case. Ex-prosecutors, civil rights lawyers, and even some moderate Republicans acknowledged behind closed doors that she had a valid case. The suit was not simply about defamation. It was about abuse of power. And it didn't end with the press conference. The following day, ex-Secretary of State Hillary Clinton tweeted, "No woman, particularly one in Congress, should ever be subject to this type of abuse. I stand with Jasmine Crockett." Progressive voices such as AOC were in agreement, further stating, "This is not just defamation, it's an abuse of power." Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski even chimed in, deeming the president's actions beneath the office. But most surprising of all was the public reaction. The common people started questioning the motives of the president in targeting a relatively new congresswoman with such precise and unsubstantiated accusations. The country was starting to realize just how risky this precedent could be. The case was already building steam. Court documents consisted of copies of the original tweets, logs of threats, and testimony from cyber forensics experts. This was not hearsay. This was irrefutable evidence. By Sunday morning, Crockett had made an appearance in an NPR interview. The interview was subdued in tone, but her message was unequivocal. This isn't about headlines. It's about safety. It's about integrity. She wasn't seeking sympathy. She wasn't positioning herself as a victim. She was calling for accountability. In the politics of spectacle, Crockett's stern, focused reply was a contrast. No name-calling, no personal jabs. Just unadulterated, unyielding pursuit of justice. She hadn't engaged in the game of pundits. She headed to court. And for the first time since President Trump's tweets were live, the discourse changed. The public discourse was not what Trump said anymore. It was what Jasmine Crockett was doing about it. Picture the shockwaves. Crockett's lawyers filed the complaint at 8 a.m. Saturday morning in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. The lawsuit was 42 pages long and listed a single defendant, Donald J. Trump, in his official capacity as the sitting president of the United States. This wasn't just any defamation lawsuit. This was a fight for justice, and Crockett was not going to back down. The central charge? Defamation per se with actual malice. The lawsuit quoted 3 tweets, all posted from Trump's verified X, formerly Twitter, account implicating Crockett in crime, foreign allegiance, and financial corruption. These were incendiary charges, but pursuant to the complaint, they were published with knowledge of falsity, factually unfounded, and made with the evident intent to injure. Why is this so important? The complaint did not simply cite the tweets. It established a precise timeline. A timeline indicating how Trump's words unleashed a tide of violent threats against Crockett. What transpired when Trump put out these tweets? The lawyers had screenshots, server logs, and digital security analyses, all illustrating how far-right groups rapidly amplified Trump's allegations. The suit wasn't about words. It was about the effect of those words. It was an image of reckless disregard for the truth. Trump's assertions were without evidence, without formal investigations, and without credible sources to support them. But the effects, they were very real. The lawsuit claimed something even greater, that this wasn't about political criticism or public interest. This was personal. Trump's tweets followed immediately after Crockett had taken on one of his supporters during a televised hearing on campaign finance ethics. Retaliation? In a bold legal gambit, Crockett's lawyers also invoked the anticipated defense, presidential immunity. Trump's aides would contest that as president, he was shielded from defamation suits. But Crockett's attorneys were prepared to battle that as well. They contended that besmirching a sitting congressman for spurious allegations fell beyond the authority of the president's official powers. And this is where the stakes become greater. Crockett didn't only wish to win. Her side had a target of $100 million in damages. Why? Not because it was only about Crockett's reputation. It was about establishing a wider precedent that influential people who employ social media to besmirch their political rivals shouldn't get off scot-free. When the lawsuit became public, it caused a stir throughout legal communities. Experts were quick to highlight the case's strength. Joyce Vance, a former federal prosecutor, described the complaint as methodical and strong. Another PBS legal scholar stated, "This isn't performative, it's surgical." Crockett's attorneys were prepared to fight this battle all the way to court. But if Trump's team was willing to settle, they were too. The White House reaction? A curt statement, "The president will respond through appropriate legal channels. These allegations are without merit." No apology, no retraction, no deletion of the initial tweets. Up to Sunday morning, they were still live. That was an important fact. Why? By leaving those tweets there, Trump's defense could be seriously dented. Legal analysts noted that leaving the tweets themselves up may indicate that Trump knew of the harm they could cause, but decided to leave them stand. This action could turn back on him. By Monday morning, within 72 hours of the filing of the suit, Crockett's team put in new filings. This was no longer a case of a simple legal fight. This was a painstakingly constructed case. They added a timeline, minute by minute, demonstrating how Trump's tweet set off a wave of cyber mayhem. The first aggressive message directed against Crockett showed up just 9 minutes into the first tweet. Within the span of the first hour, more than 600 tweets or responses with her name had been made, accompanied by adjectives such as traitor, corrupt, and foreign agent. Things only got more heated from there. By 48 hours in, Crockett's private email account, never publicly published, had been breached in an attempted hack. It was tracked to a foreign IP address. And it did not end there. A threatening voicemail left on one of Crockett's aides' phones was menacing. The caller condemned Crockett of stealing from the country and threatened that she would be treated like a traitor. But the dangers were not restricted to phone calls. The online harassment was systematic and coordinated. A few fans on far-right message boards even encouraged others to dox her and visit her home state. One included a target symbol over Crockett's head. Another delineated her home state and district in detail, asking patriots in Texas to pay her a visit. This was not simply some individual trolling. This was an organized network connected to other campaigns of harassment against public figures, and particularly women of color. This was personal, and Crockett's team wasn't done yet. They submitted police reports from both D.C. and Dallas, where Crockett's family had received menacing letters and packages. One envelope contained a photo of Crockett crossed out in red ink with the message, "Fake your smile now. We're watching." As the case went on, the media paid serious attention. Legal experts commented, and public officials from both sides began voicing objections. The National Council of Negro Women and Emily's List showed support for Crockett, endorsing her bravery. Legal experts began to discuss the potential landmark status of her case, asking how courts would approach digital defamation by an elected public official. The stakes had changed. Crockett was no longer merely defending herself. She was standing up for every woman who had been instructed to keep quiet in the event of abuse, harassment, and slander. She was standing up for all of us. The public outcry in favor of Crockett only intensified as the days passed by. Within Capitol Hill, there were various Democratic and independent politicians who expressed their solidarity. Representative Ayanna Pressley was one of them, describing the attack as deliberate and dangerous. Crockett's case was not merely a battle for justice. It was about establishing boundaries for what is acceptable for public officials to do and not do on social media. The First Amendment, presidential immunity, and the authority of social media were all at stake. By midweek, Crockett's lawsuit was no longer merely a low-key legal action. It had become a national rallying cry. It was not politics. It was accountability, safety, and truth. The once used hashtags for disseminating disinformation, hashtag Crockett exposed, hashtag Crockett is corrupt, were being hijacked by the fans. The user started covering conspiracy content with pieces from Crockett's speeches, stories explaining the lawsuit, and personal messages of support. But what unfolded next was nothing less than a social media revolution. Hashtags such as hashtag We Stand With Jasmine and hashtag Protect Black Women in Office started trending. Among the civic leaders and activists, the momentum shifted. Influential cultural leaders turned up to take on the cause. Viola Davis tweeted, "This is the price of telling the truth in public. I stand with Jasmine Crockett." Taraji P. Henson reposted Crockett's NPR interview with the words, "Courage, grace, strength, period." Most strong, however, was the assertion made by Michelle Obama, who Instagrammed, "When power is wielded to intimidate instead of serve, we have to speak. When words are wielded to put in harm's way instead of to guide, we have to resist. I'm proud of Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett for holding her ground." That status was shared 1 million times in 24 hours. But Crockett herself? She remained surprisingly silent on Twitter. Her sole tweet was brief and unadorned. "I see you. I hear you. I appreciate every one of you." It was not a coincidence. Crockett's staff wanted the lawsuit, rather than her timeline, to be the priority. Her press secretary assured that Crockett was concentrated, serene, and determined. But what was going on behind the scenes? Her workspace needed to grow. The voicemails, emails, and letters of support started pouring in from all over the country. Some were from constituents, others from women in government, community leaders, or victims of internet harassment. They simply wanted to be able to say, "Thanks for not giving up." The war in court had only just started, but already it was certain that one thing, Jasmine Crockett was not alone. She had ignited something far bigger, a dialogue, a movement, and a demand for accountability which could no longer be dismissed as mere partisan rhetoric. At the same time, the White House was eerily quiet. With escalating media scrutiny and Republican and Democratic calls for him to speak out, President Trump remained mum about it all. No press conferences, no live TV denials, and perhaps most telling, the initial tweets that had set the whole controversy ablaze were still up on his X account, unfixed, uncensored, and as incendiary as when first uploaded. Why the silence? Insiders at the White House disclosed it wasn't indifference, but rather a strategy. Top advisors were said to be split. Some urged Trump to double down, seeing the suit as yet another witch hunt that would be reframed as a First Amendment fight. But others, particularly those with legal backgrounds, were growing concerned about the tenor and breadth of the complaint. Why? The lawyers behind the suit weren't merely making claims. They were building a cause and effect scenario. The president's rhetoric had set off a wave of harassment that had the potential to become physical. Initial reports from audio threats, digital forensics, and police intervention created a stark image. Trump wasn't merely being challenged. His words had consequences. One of Trump's attorney's internal memos was said to state there is no precedent for a defamation suit of this magnitude against a sitting president, but there is clear and present risk. So what did the White House do about it? By Wednesday, Press Secretary Lisa Michaels was compelled to respond to the lawsuit. Asked point blank about it, she said, "The president has no comment at this time. We are confident the matter will be addressed through the proper legal channels." Asked repeatedly if the president was backing up the tweets, Michaels provided a nebulous response. The president shares his opinions freely, as is his constitutional right. But here's the twist. The cracks were already beginning to appear. Behind closed doors, White House staff were quietly preparing for a legal counterattack that could include subpoenas, televised depositions, or even testimony by senior aides. The concern wasn't so much that the case would be lost in court, but that the legal process itself would lead to revelations that the administration did not wish to be made. For instance, who assisted in drafting or signing off on the early tweets? Trump himself? Were advisors consulted? Was campaign staff involved? And those questions, if asked in court, they had the possibility of revealing weaknesses that extended beyond mere this lawsuit. The risk of damage wasn't merely for the case, it was for what might be revealed. Meanwhile, the media started catching up. Conservative media, although still defending Trump, couldn't help but acknowledge the merits of the case. Fox News' Bret Baier presented a segment recognizing the legal merit of the case, mentioning that this was not a case that disappears overnight. Wall Street Journal similarly opined, calling on the administration to respect the lawsuit and cautioning against minimizing the reputational price of seeming to single out a fellow public official without reason. But the GOP lawmakers remained silent. Some of the hardliners brushed off the lawsuit as political drama, but leading GOP senators and representatives in the House largely avoided questions. What did this silence say? It said the gravity of the lawsuit was impossible to deny. Crockett's lawyers weren't sitting idle, however. The White House silence only made their case stronger. If he had evidence, he would have posted it, said Marcus Callahan, the attorney for Crockett. If he had a defense, he would have made it. The silence was growing louder. By the end of the week, it was certain the lawsuit wasn't merely holding on, it was redirecting the discourse. Media coverage went into overdrive, with each major outlet covering the story. What began as a private legal fight had become the top story on cable news, political blogs, and online news websites. The suit was no longer a buzzworthy issue. It had reached litmus test status on how seriously Americans felt about defending public officials from targeted, unfounded assaults, particularly when issued from the highest office. The heat was on. CNN spent a whole segment discussing Crockett's case, talking to legal analysts, digital rights advocates, and former congressional aides. MSNBC devoted a full hour to discussing the tone of Trump's tweets and the wide consensus and evidence of harassment online. Even conservative media such as Fox News recognized that Trump's rhetoric might land him in serious legal trouble, and this is where it got larger. Crockett's legal battle became a rallying cry. It was no longer solely about one congresswoman. It was about accountability, security, and truth in the age of the internet. By midweek, the lawsuit of Jasmine Crockett had become more than a legal complaint. It was a movement, one that had ignited national attention and bipartisanship. A movement that was now more about principle than about politics. A movement about keeping power from being wielded in such a way that it could no longer damage reputations without accountability. Representative Crockett is demonstrating enormous courage in holding this administration to task. She is not just defending her name. She is defending democratic norms. The Congressional Black Caucus, of which Crockett was an active member, acted quickly. They issued a collective letter criticizing the president's actions, signed by all 58 members. The letter requested that the White House publicly withdraw the false allegations and make a formal apology, not just for the defamatory material, but also for the personal risk that Crockett had been put into. The letter was read into the House record by Representative Barbara Lee. Outside of the caucus, senior Senate Democrats also joined in. Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker, and Raphael Warnock all issued statements backing the lawsuit. Even moderate Democrats like Senator Joe Manchin weighed in, not necessarily agreeing with the $100 million figure, but cautioning that we've reached a point where we're discussing each other in a way that is unacceptable in public service. But the test came on the Republican side, and it was revealing. Among Trump's staunchest supporters, the response was knee-jerk. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene labeled the lawsuit a left-wing stunt, casting Crockett as weaponizing victimhood. Senator J.D. Vance said on Twitter that politics is tough, and added, if she can't take a few tweets, maybe she's in the wrong job. But other members of the party were notably more restrained. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, when pressed by reporters, declined to comment on the lawsuit. I'll let the courts handle that, he said tersely. His avoidance was telling. McConnell rarely shies away from a political brawl, but in this case, he clearly saw risk. A few Republican voices even broke ranks. Independent-minded Senator Lisa Murkowski did not mince words and went public stating, I don't know what the president was attempting to do with those tweets, but what he did was damaging, and it wasn't leadership. Representative Nancy Mace, a moderate Republican, also disapproved of the attacks in a local radio interview and stated, it's unacceptable to hurl unfounded allegations at a colleague, particularly one who has received threats as a result. We ought to be arguing policy, not defaming one another online. These fissures, while not numerically overwhelming, had symbolic significance. Crockett's situation had become something greater than a matter of law. It was a moral examination of how elected representatives would act when power was employed to assault a member of their own party. It wasn't only legislators being questioned. Political contributors started chiming in as well. Some of Trump's most well-known supporters reportedly were worried about the harm the tweets and the lawsuit could inflict on swing voters in suburban districts. We can't continue to lose women voters, said one longtime GOP donor speaking anonymously to Politico. This is painful. It's irresponsible. Democratic fundraising surged. A number of PACs associated with defending women in politics created online drives using Crockett's story as a call to action. Within 4 days of the filing of the lawsuit, her campaign announced a surge in small-dollar donations and volunteer registrations, especially among women under age 40. But most telling may have been the increasing unease among younger members of both parties. A group of bipartisan first-term representatives, many who were prominent social media users, quietly expressed their concerns that unregulated cyber attacks could become the new normal. One emboldened anonymous freshman Republican explained to The Hill, "We all witnessed what was done to her. It could happen to any of us next. There's no filter anymore, no lie." The political atmosphere had already been strained, but Crockett's lawsuit, due to its specificity, its documentation, and her assertive but measured stance, had hit a nerve. It wasn't an over-the-top struggle. It wasn't a yelling battle in cable television. It was a legal complaint against consequences, substantiated by evidence and indemnified by law. And that made it more difficult for anyone to dismiss. To President Trump, the price was not merely legal, it was political. Allies were being compelled to respond to questions they were not ready for. His supporters could not point to proof, because there was none. And for the first time in many years, his characteristic bluster had been countered not by outrage and protest, but by a courtroom filing, served matter-of-factly and boldly by a sitting congressman who had not been intimidated. The lines were being drawn, and not everyone was on his side. By the second week's end, something was indeed shifting, not in the court of law, but in the court of public opinion. Crockett's defamation case had progressed from a news headline to a movement. America-wide, ordinary people started to engage with the narrative, not merely as political watchers, but as citizens attempting to make sense of what it was like when the president used his bully pulpit to publicly attack a fellow elected official based on no facts. Surveys started to show that shift. A Reuters Ipsos poll, published 10 days after the lawsuit was filed, discovered that 62% of Americans feel the president crossed the line with his public accusations. Among independents, that figure increased to 69%, indicating that the controversy had tapped a nerve across party lines. Even 28% of Republicans surveyed expressed discomfort with the president's tweets and wished he would dial it back. At the same time, Crockett's approval ratings received a noticeable boost, particularly in urban and suburban areas where professional women and younger voters form a formidable base. Her team measured a 36% jump in activity on her website, plus thousands of emails of support, many of them from people who said they hadn't known much about her beforehand. These weren't all political operatives. Some were teachers, veterans, nurses, or small business owners, people who perceived in Crockett something unusual, determination without theatrics. Her tone, measured, factual, and unflinching, touched those who were weary of performative outrage out of Washington. One of her office's letters, with permission, was from a 56-year-old Ohio postal worker. "You're the first person in a while I've seen who stood up without yelling, 'You didn't make this into a circus. You just said that's a lie and went to court.' That's strength." Social media also started showing a rising tide of respect. TikTok content creators uploaded analysis of the case, praising Crockett's composed, steady demeanor and the simplicity of the legal papers. One video named "This is how you check a bully with evidence" was trending, gaining 3 million views within 2 days. Another content creator spliced tweets of Trump with Crockett's press conference, captioned, "He yelled, she sued." The tide had shifted. Crockett's defenders were taking back the platform, sharing court papers, links to credible fact checks, and accounts of other women who'd experienced harassment in public life. A viral movement on the #ProtectHerSeat showcased profiles of lawmakers of both parties, with Crockett representing a movement calling for accountability, not just from political foes, but from the platforms that spread disinformation. Crockett's battle in the courts had grown larger than a case. It was a reckoning. A moment in time when the battle for truth was turning into a battle for the protection of public servants everywhere. The use of words and the duty that accompanies it had never been more stark. This is where we are today. As Crockett takes on the fight, we need to ask ourselves, how far will we go to safeguard truth and integrity in the face of unbridled power? The battle may be far from over, but this moment counts, and the stakes could not be higher. Now it's our turn. Stand with Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Stand with those who fight for truth, accountability, and justice. Make your voice heard. Share the message, and never let silence be confused with consent. This isn't just about a woman. It's about defending our democracy, our values, and the safety of all of those who hold public office. Because if we don't stand up now, who will? If you feel that the right thing is worth fighting for, if you feel that accountability and justice are important, and if you feel that we owe it to those who have risked their lives for our nation, then this isn't the end of the story. Nor should yours be. Subscribe now and join the ride, because your voice matters. Stay updated. Stay motivated. Together, we can ensure accountability, truth, and justice never fall on deaf ears. Hit the subscribe button and join the battle for what is right.